it's a little bit more of a FOMO that's driving the purchases. So that exceeds right now what we are seeing in terms of downgrading or right sizing of the retirees. But according to me and my students' forecast, we are likely to, by the year 2030, have more deaths than births at around that turning point. And this aging population, starting from last year, we have got about 50,000 people celebrating their 65th birthday. And these numbers will grow. And so within the next 10 years, I think you will see more and more people who are selling because they are right sizing. But in the last 18 months, it has more been a FOMO sort of thing where the delay in construction got some people a little bit more urgent and they are putting their money down early.
So it's a ripple effect, right? The fear of missing out, so you need to go out and get it just in case something worse kicks in. Is there that sense that it's just going to get worse? Is that hanging about in the air? Are people feeling it really?
That part, I'm not sure whether it is a real fear justified by market numbers, because if we look 5 to 10 years down the road, the demographics trends is really not with the buyers today. So they're buying into a relatively high price and high risk situation now, because the next 10 years of new home buyers, that cohort has shrunk. I mean, 25 years ago, already we know that our childbirth numbers are low. So the demographics is definitely against us going forward.
I think there's no doubt that in terms of demography, at least not just in the simple context, but more generally in a lot of high-income countries, there is a clear headwind and the trending down. But by the same token, I would say that, in fact, this phenomenon of relatively high, since we're talking about real estate, relatively high real estate prices is actually a global phenomenon. This has been a case regardless of whether it is in Singapore, which is primarily an urban setting, or in other countries where there are, in fact, rural or suburban properties, which have also been elevated. A big part of that, of course, is that as disposable incomes have risen because people are not spending as much on services and so on, the impression I get, services travel in particular, people are spending it more on durable goods as well as housing, because they're spending so much more time at home and making decisions on upgrading. So I think there is definitely a bit of a psychological shift as well in terms of what individuals feel is comparatively important in life.
I think we need to be cognizant of the supply-demand imbalance as well, and we do not need to look very far. Just drive up to Woodlands, take binoculars and look across the water, and we can see like the 90% vacancy in the newly built condominiums there. So there is always the possibility of oversupplying a market without having sufficient warm bodies to fill up the real estate.
This spending, this high spending of high price luxury goods, the tier for property is one level, but if you look at spending for luxury goods, you can feel it on the ground. You're wondering why people have so much money now. If you, some people explain it away. The middle income and higher has nowhere to spend their money. They can't travel. They don't spend on air tickets. They can't shop abroad. And what do you get? Anecdotal research. You walk to any Rolex authorized dealers, they have nothing to sell you. Nothing. Okay. You walk into Hermes after queuing up outside their shop, long queue. Then they will tell you, oh, you can't buy this, you can't buy that. And so it is a really, really strange phenomenon. It's COVID, but you have money, and what the Hokkien will say, ului bui bo, you have the money, but you can't buy anything. The demand is phenomenal.
Oh, but at the same time, and Edwin, I'm sure you know from your work with the charity groups, the report recently that came out was saying that we've got 300,000 people who could not get 2 warm meals a day. So the disparity and the break of the haves and the have-nots have actually gone wider.
Absolutely true, both domestically. It's something that was raised is, I think it's not just about meals. I think there has been some emerging evidence. If you look at DBS data on individual saving accounts and what's left behind, it has been the case that the lower half of the socio-economic spectrum, they have been hit comparatively harder by the pandemic. They are living more on paycheck to paycheck. I meet quite a bit of especially low-income individuals that are really struggling. Some have lost their jobs, especially those that are operating more on a gig or odd jobs basis. And now on the other hand, you have rising incomes, which, as we've all discussed, is not being as easily spent with the usual kind of consumption of services and so on. And so this bifurcation happens in Singapore, but it is also a phenomenon that's happening globally as well. So I think it is definitely an emerging trend, and one will hope that over time we will start to see some of that reversal of this processing.
Usually with in times of crisis, right, it's an opportunity for people to come together, band together and push forward. But I'm not sure if we've seen that in this crisis. Based on what you just said, there's this the divide is growing. What can we do then to resolve that or try and reduce that gap?
Okay, so in a similar vein, then we all agree that the ground and the fundamentals are shifting, right? And I don't think that the ground is set or is going to set anytime soon, especially because of this recent Omicron spread. So I see the fundamentals changing, but what is the new fundamentals by which we could produce another ruler to measure our growth or to measure and to do some forecasting for next year? I'm really still looking for a few of the indicators that I might be confident to start using, right? So my outlook for next year, I think inflation will be here for a while, unexpectedly, and the supply chain unexpectedly is jammed up somehow. And then this other concern of mine about potentially an increase in GST next year because of this parliament wanting to come to a balanced budget, say by the end of this parliament. That would be my concern for just the next 12 to 18 months.
If I may echo that, obviously an increase in the GST is in fact, I think, both potentially premature, but also a negative drag on an economy that is still on its way to working out the dysfunction that was introduced as a result of COVID-19. So I think there's a need for quite a bit of patience. I think inevitably, given the way that this particular government has already made it clear that there is an intention to not just raise the GST, but to make good on the deficits that were incurred. So I think that aspect, if no alternative sources of revenue are identified and passed through legislature, I think that would definitely be the case. My personal view is that there are, in fact, certain alternatives that we can look into if we do believe that those in the higher socioeconomic classes have done comparatively better. Certainly one way would be through, I am on record for pushing for a wealth tax for the highest income earners. But even if you step one step down to those that are not the very highest, but still a relatively high income, looking at options for another tier of additional buyer's stamp duty in property may be something to think about, to explore. And there are, in fact, other subsidiary benefits that could come from this kind of exploration, not least thinking about how we want to also quell some of the excess speculation in the property market, as we were discussing earlier on.